going to be running you through best practice for disaster recovery planning. So could I get someone to type in the questions box so that they can both hear me and see my screen? Thank you. Let's go ahead and get started. So in today's agenda, we're running through why business continuity is critical, recovery point objectives, recovery time objectives. I'll show you a quick demonstration of how you can gain your RPOs and RTOs both through ShadowProtect, Virtual Boot, and also the StorageCraft Cloud services, and just finish off with a few best practice tips for yourself so you can implement a very rock solid disaster recovery strategy for your client's site. So the real first question to ask yourself is, why are we here? And these are the reasons why. First of all, 85% of systems are not actually backed up, and that is a huge opportunity for you and a huge marker for you as the partner, or if you're the end user, to actually implement a strategy so that you have something that if something does happen or when the disaster does hit your site, you can get up and running as fast as possible. When we think of disasters, people always think of, natural disasters, tsunamis, earthquakes, fires, but in reality, 80% of loss is due to human operational error. Someone clicking on the link to the bank that they received, even though they're not part of that bank, they click it, they get ransomware. Those are the human errors that we are seeing more and more prevalent in today's society. Only 20% is actually due to hardware loss, OS security, power, or natural disasters. So the majority is actually coming from the human factor. And right at the bottom down there, the very last point, up to 40% of backup restores actually fail. There's absolutely no point in backing up if you can't restore. So as part of your best practice for disaster recovery planning, I'll talk you through how you can actually test your backups to ensure that you're able to restore from them. Just running off the first few points also is that you do not need a major disaster to require rapid system recovery. Everyday occurrences can bring a system down. People deleting stuff accidentally, if you're looking at ransomware, once again, these are all everyday occurrences. Every business will have a disaster at some point in time. For those of you in Australia, even around the world, you'd be very aware of ransomware and how it's really taking a front page in today's headlines. Even though it's been around for years, ransomware, whether it's crypto locker or whatnot, it's very, very big in today's market. And people being affected by it, it's important to protect yourselves. From a few examples here, Cadbury factory in Tasmania, the Red and Spearlight cameras down in Victoria, and also the WannaCry screen. This is what you would actually see. And once again, for those of you in Australia, a few statistics from the ACCC. The fact is, people are losing money to ransomware. People are being affected, both personal and companies. It is very, very important to protect yourselves. One thing we always talk about, it's not a question of if, but when the disaster strikes. And that is the thing. People always say to themselves, nothing's happened to me. I don't need anything in place, but something will happen to you at some point in time. It is very important to really consider the idea of it's not a question of if, but when. Part of today's webinar and the reason for it, on the left-hand side there, 80% of companies without proper data protection and recovery strategies go out of business within 2 years of a disaster. This is why we're here. This is why you want to implement a strategy to enable businesses, or the business you're looking after, or your business, to get up and running ASAP when the disaster hits. And just the middle point on the right there by Gartner, by 2020, Gartner estimates that 60% of digital businesses will suffer major service failures due to the inability of IT security teams to manage digital risk. In today's digital society, everything is digital. It's very critical to protect yourselves at all times. So let's first of all talk about recovery point objectives and the fact that, you can't only back up just once a day. For those of you who aren't aware of what a recovery point objective is, essentially it's just a point in time in the past which you will recover from. And the thing we're going to really stress today is with traditional, block-based, file-based backups, people are only actually backing up just once a day. And essentially that is not good enough, especially nowadays. With StorageCraft, and what I'll show you is best practice for us, backing up at least, or we'll prefer backing up every 15 minutes using continuous incrementals. The key question to ask you when you're deciding your RPOs, and for the partners out there, it's important to establish your RPOs and RTOs in your service level agreements. The question to ask yourself, how much data are you willing to lose and have to rekey into your system? If we take this little diagram down at the bottom, we have an incremental backup, incremental backup, incremental backup, and a disaster strikes. If those incremental backups are occurring every 15 minutes, when the disaster strikes, we have to roll back to a maximum of 15 minutes ago. If these backups, say if they weren't incremental backups and they were just full backups and they were occurring every day, if that disaster there at the end occurred at, say, 4 p.m., we would have to roll back to the previous day's backup. We'll lose essentially entire day's worth of data. Backing up once a day just isn't acceptable anymore. You lose 8 hours of data, for example, an entire day's worth of data, multiply that by the number of employees and the number of hours it'll take to then rekey in that data, it equals a lot of dollars. Typical environment here, what we're looking at is ShadowProtect, whether you're putting it on your virtual physical servers, desktops, Windows, or Linux. We focus on backing up every 15 minutes with near to little impact on your system. And we're backing up, if you see down the bottom there, to a backup and disaster recovery appliance or server, which I'll discuss a bit more detail. Next, we'll talk about recovery time objectives. The idea of the recovery time objective is we want to get up and running in minutes as opposed to days. So for RTOs, what an RTO is point in time in the future at which you'll be up and running again. So how long is it actually going to take you to restore back to full production? The fact is, taking 2, 3 days, even longer to get up and running, once again, just isn't acceptable, and it's going to cost your business a lot of money. The question to ask yourself, or to ask your customers, how fast do you want to get up and running? And are you happy with no employees working for 3 days? When you ask people what they actually want, obviously they want to lose no data and be up and running, within seconds or minutes. The fact is, if you talk to them about their actual backup and disaster recovery strategy, a lot of the time they're going to take 2, 3 days, sometimes even longer to get up and running. And their backups, they don't want to lose any data. They might lose 8 hours worth of data. So it's important to establish that what your customers or what you currently have at the moment does not actually meet what your expectations. So in the little diagram at the bottom, the recovery time objective, when the disaster strikes in the middle, on the far left-hand side, we have our last incremental backup. That restore process, say starting at from the incremental backup to the app and data recovery, how long is that process taking? And that is a recovery time objective. We say minutes. We don't want days. We don't want weeks. So in the idea of a server going down, what I'll show you, and you can also see off here, is using the StorageCraft Virtual Boot. Virtual Boot technology, it allows for you to virtualize your system, even entire infrastructure, in just a matter of minutes. We say here 3 to 5 minutes. You boot it from any 15-minute point incremental, regardless of the size of the backup or the server, spin the machine up, get up and running ASAP. And we're talking 3 to 5 minutes as opposed to 2 to 3 days using the StorageCraft Virtual Boot technology. What we also have here to get up and running is Head Start Restore, which is actually a included function in Image Manager. And what Head Start Restore does, it pre-pushes all your images into a standby ready machine. So whether it's VMDK, VHD, VHDX, pre-pushes your images into the standby ready machine so that when the disaster hits, up the top, down the bottom, you can get all your servers turned on in just a matter of minutes back into a permanent infrastructure. So as opposed to virtual boot, which is a temporary disaster recovery solution, Head Start Restore allows you to make that disaster recovery permanent on new infrastructure. The next thing we'll also talk about in getting your RTOs all the way down is the StorageCraft Cloud services, which I'll also demonstrate for you. And what we're doing with this is, as you can see there on the screen, near real-time replication. So as soon as your backups are created, replicate them off-site to the StorageCraft Cloud. What we're doing here is removing and eliminating the need for tape, drives, and requirements, and even for your customers to, plug in a USB drive every day, copy the backups, pull them off-site, all that manual work. We want to automate everything, automate the backups being sent, replicated off-site, and using, best practices, making sure we have on-site copy, but also having that off-site copy for us for disaster recovery, especially if your whole site goes down, whole building burns down. That's when we have the StorageCraft Cloud. We can fail over and virtualize pretty much instantaneously, just a matter of minutes. Once again, we're bringing that recovery time objective all the way down to just minutes, as opposed to days, as opposed to hours. We always try and really push ideas of it's not about backup, it's all about disaster recovery. Backup is just one component where it's just, taking a backup machine, you're not really doing anything with it, you're storing it away. We're talking about disaster recovery so that when you something does happen to your site, getting yourselves up and running in just a matter of minutes. So for the best practice and RPOs and RTOs, we'll cover off quickly. So ShadowProtect SPX, which I'll show you how to back up as well as every 15 minutes. Virtual boot, which is that virtualization for business continuity in a temporary virtual environment, and also the StorageCraft Cloud services to really minimize your RTOs. So let's first of all go into virtual boot. So just down here, I have ShadowProtect SPX, and here's a couple of best practices for you. So creating a new backup job, I'll just run you through quickly. Job name, it can be whatever you want it to be. Compression, leave it as standard. If you change it to best, it takes up a few more resources, but probably only improves the compression by 1 or 2%. So just leave it as standard. Encryption, 128-bit all the way up to 256-bit. Kind of like the idea of the compression. 128-bit has essentially never been cracked. So you're fine leaving it on RC4. If you want to move it up to 256 for compliance purposes, absolutely go ahead. Just a tiny bit more resources on your machine. But 128-bit, never been cracked, might as well just click on it and choose that. So always implement a password for your backups. As many of you know, to even access a backup, if you lose, say, if someone steals an incremental backup, it's actually useless to them without the entire chain in the base image. Either way, if they take all the images, make sure you have a password on it so that nothing can happen to the data. Selecting a backup volumes, pretty much back up all the volumes, or whether you want just OS or data volumes. For pretty much majority of the servers, you're going to select all volumes anyway. If we click on schedule, this is where the recovery point objective comes into play. And let's look at continuous incrementals. So continuous incrementals, we do a single full base image. And from there on, we only do tiny incremental backups as low as every 15 minutes. These incremental backups, as I mentioned earlier, have little to no impact on your server. So there's absolutely no reason, especially in today's technology out there, to back up or do a full backup every day, let alone every week. Continuous incrementals coupled with Image Manager, will ensure that you're able to restore and recover from your backups. Your backups are tiny, they're fast, you can replicate them off site also. For entire schedule, you select all days. So the other little tip for yourselves, do not back up on the hour. Just back up just off the hour, say 2 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it is, whatever you'd like. Each backup you want to be just off the hour. And that is because Windows does a lot of their updates, which can access VSS and does a lot of updates on the hour. So what we don't want any conflictions between backing up and the Windows updates. If you do it just off the hour, you're pretty fine to go. Down here, let's change this to every 15 minutes. I would say for any server, no more than 2 hours. 15 minutes, half an hour, 1 hour is generally what we're looking at for people to have their backups on. So let's look at every 15 minutes. We look at advanced. I won't go through too much detail here, but we do have performance throttling up the top. If you want to add in your own scripts, feel free to chuck them in here. Don't ever split your image files into smaller sizes. Leave them as just a single one, so don't click that box. And you'll notice that for those of you who'll be doing full backups every week, this is grayed out. If you're doing continuous incrementals, you must use Image Manager. So these are the settings for you. Encryption, 128-bit. Backup, just off the hour, every 15 minutes. And there's the advanced tab. And those are the best practices for backing up using ShadowProtect. So that is your recovery point objectives. Now let's look at your recovery time objectives. So if I just go into here, go into my C drive, demo, backups, Exchange server. This here is just a little demonstration Exchange server that I have running, which is this virtual machine here, which I'll show you for the cloud services. So let's quickly discuss what we're going to do for our recovery time objectives. How do we get up and running ASAP when your server crashes? Using StorageCraft, we right-click on, let's just right-click on this incremental. StorageCraft Virtual Boot. Using the StorageCraft Virtual Boot technology, it's a temporary DR solution to get your servers up and running straight away. So what we always recommend, which I'll discuss just a bit of a tip later on, and we do have a white paper on this, which I can send out after, is having your backups sitting on a backup and disaster recovery appliance with a bit of resources, 16 gigs of RAM, 32 gigs of RAM, whatever it may be, as its own isolated backup appliance. Having Virtual Boot on that particular appliance allows you to do this. And it allows you to then spin up your servers, 1, 2, 4, 10 servers up, whatever it may be, and depending how highly you spec your backup disaster recovery appliance, allows you to then virtualize your servers in just a matter of minutes. So if we type in this password here, I'm just going to do just the C drive. I won't worry about the D at the moment. We'll use Oracle VirtualBox. You can also virtual boot directly into VMware vSphere and also Hyper-V. With the vSphere Virtual Boot, we actually won a gold award in 2016 at VMworld. I'll just use VirtualBox, which give it any name. Specify the CPUs, RAM, don't attach a network adapter, whatever it may be, and simply hit create. So you going through this particular process allows you to get your recovery time objective all the way down, as I mentioned previously, in the 3 to 5 minute range, as opposed to the 2, 3 hour or even day range. The key thing to note for this is that I've mentioned it previously, it is a temporary disaster recovery solution, this Virtual Boot. It's about business continuity. It's about getting your customers or your business up and running in a matter of minutes. You're not going to expect it to work at 100% of the production environment, more likely closer to, anywhere between 65, 75%. Once again, depending on how highly spec'd your machine is. What you're looking with this is getting up and running to provide business continuity so everyone can continue to work. because if everyone's not working, you're paying them to not work. They're sitting down doing nothing. You're losing money. So using this virtual boot gets everyone into the machines, gets them running, working again, which means you're not losing money. So let's dismiss this. If you'll notice, which I didn't really do a change here, but this VM here is a direct copy of this down here. So that's pretty much a virtual boot. So recovery time objective, getting that all the way down. With SPX, we talked about the recovery point objective, making it 15-minute backups. I'm just going to quickly shut this down. Click on here. So let's look at the StorageCraft Cloud services and what the cloud services, and in regards to best practices, obviously having your backups off-site. By having your backups in the StorageCraft Cloud services, it allows you to then virtualize your machines within the StorageCraft Cloud in case of a site-wide disaster. So if I go back here, site-wide disaster, spin all the machines up in the StorageCraft Cloud. This VM here, do the same thing. Let's just create a folder, Cloud 1122, open up ShadowProtect, and I'm just going to kick off an incremental backup of that folder I just created. Right click, start backup now, incremental backup. Okay, so this will take a couple of seconds. And when we talk about your recovery time objective, how we can actually back up every 15 minutes, because we're a sector-based backup technology. A lot of people always talk to you about block-based, file-based. We are sector-based. So each block is actually made up of 8 sectors. So we're in the lowest form of backing up. It means our backups are tiny. As you can see, I made that change. Took only a couple of seconds. Let's just shut the machine down and give it a few seconds to just, so this is like simulating a complete crash of your machine. Say your whole server, your whole site went down. What would you actually do? And how do you minimize your recovery time objective in case of a site-wide disaster? If you're backing up the tapes, you have your tapes off site, and that's your disaster recovery plan, you're aware that, you know, those tapes are off somewhere in some sort of warehouse, stacked up somewhere, you know, maybe thrown in a pile, wherever they may be. You have to get someone to go out, get the tapes, find the tapes, bring them back, start your restore process. Tapes are fairly old technology, and a lot of the time tape restores do fail. With the StorageCraft Cloud services, making sure you get your recovery time objective all the way down to minutes as opposed to days or weeks. Let's go into cloud services. This is my particular account right here. Exchange server, that was the VM I was just running. Give it a few seconds to load. And here you can see at 11:23, which is just a minute ago, incremental number 77 went up. It was then converted. If I hit generate recovery point, and this is exactly what you would do if your customer called you up, or if you realize your whole site's gone down, log into this portal. Let's refresh down the bottom over here. And we have our manually requested backup image. From here, launch VM, fairly simple. Select that incremental backup. I'll auto destroy. Now, if this is a real disaster, tick real failover. And what that means is that we'll start taking backups of this machine, or I should say snapshots of the machine that's running in the cloud. Simply virtualize. Let me type in my password again. And that's pretty much it. So that's virtualizing your entire server within the StorageCraft Cloud. A couple of minutes. This will probably take another 4 minutes or so to actually turn on. And part of the reason why it's so fast, and a lot of the questions that you may have might be around this networking feature of why we can actually just go in and click virtualize, is because we've pre-configured all our networking. So the networking itself is a very important part of the StorageCraft Cloud services. What we have here is subnet configuration. So if you want your DNS server to work properly, we can then modify our subnet over here and also make a list of the DNS. IPsec for site to site. So if your disaster happens, your whole entire site goes down. You get everyone to move to a different building, create an IPsec tunnel, connect up, everyone can continue working. We also utilize OpenVPN. So if everyone goes home, we have 2 users here, myself and Carl. We can add a user, download the configuration file to then connect up to the VPN. We also use a pfSense firewall, which you can also connect up to here. Requesting a public IP just down here to add into your VPN. We have DHCP and DHCP reservation over here to then edit our private IP address. Let's change that back. And network mapping for port forwarding down the bottom. All of this, you can configure yourself, pre-configure it so that when the disaster hits, go in, log in, turn everything on. Your recovery time objective from a site-wide disaster, you could have it as low as 15 minutes to actually get up and running. Typically, if it's site-wide disaster, you're going to allow a few hours, but just note for yourself and for your customers, you can have them up and running in minutes as opposed to hours. Just back to here. That was the demo for SPX, Virtual Boot and Cloud Services. Regarding recovery point objectives, SPX, backing up every 15 minutes. Recovery time objectives, getting up and running, best practice. Virtual Boot for on-site, 3 to 5 minutes. Cloud Services for site-wide disaster, virtualized in the StorageCraft Cloud in just a matter of minutes. So a couple of best practice tips just to end this, and I'll open up for questions after. Back up every 15 minutes to 2 hours. So this would depend on your server type. When we do not, and we won't look at backing up every day anymore. Once a day, once a week, it's not a viable solution nowadays. 15 minutes to 2 hours, 15 minutes, half an hour, 1 hour, 2 hours, whatever it may be. Have an on-site backup and disaster recovery appliance, as opposed to just backing up to say NAS, or even worth just a hard drive from JV Hi-Fi. What we want you to do is implement a backup and disaster recovery appliance that allows you to actually virtualize your servers using the virtual boot. You can use a HP NUC, HP micro server, implementing a micro server on your site. Very, very cost effective and allows you to do the virtualization and also run Image Manager off that. Lock down the BDR appliance also. So we do have a white paper on this, which I tried to attach, but I couldn't, unfortunately. I'm not sure why it didn't work. Preventing ransomware, preventing anyone from accessing this backup and disaster recovery appliance. That's what you want. So you want to lock it down, make sure ransomware, make sure no one can get in, purely for backups, so that when disaster hits, do the virtual boot. Replicate off-site. So whether you're using the StorageCraft Cloud for disaster recovery, even replicating anywhere else, you can now replicate to Amazon S3 buckets. Also using Image Manager, replicate off-site. Don't leave your data just in one spot, in the server room that any old Joe, the cleaner, can accidentally hit or knock a bucket of water on it. Replicating to the StorageCraft Cloud services for disaster recovery, best practice for that, it provides you with business continuity. Also, finally, testing your backups regularly. As I mentioned at the start of the webinar, up to 40% of backups fail. Test your backups with Image Manager. With Image Manager, first of all, when a backup is made, SPX verifies the backups. Every single day, when Image Manager does this processing, it also re-verifies to ensure you have a shortest path back to the base image. Every 7 days, it'll then once again verify. So it does it every single night and every 7 days on the weekly backup to ensure that you have a verified shortest path back to the base image. The newer feature of Image Manager, you can also do an automated virtual boot every single night, every day, every week of your backups, which I'll show you just here. Go to Image Manager. If I go into, there. Verification. Down here, advanced verification, ensure new consolidated image file successfully boot. So whether you want your dailies, if you're doing incrementals, every day it'll do this virtual boot. It'll also do it on your weeklies and your monthlies. You can also capture a screenshot. So what it'll do is wherever the backups are stored, I don't have one here, but say in this particular folder, it'll actually store an image of this machine successfully booted up. So with all of this and all these best practices, you can ensure that you'll always be able to recover from any sort of disaster with StorageCraft. So thanks everyone for joining me here today. If you do have any questions, feel free to ask them right now in the questions box. For everyone attending, I'll also send across the best practice guides for cloud services, for locking down your backup disaster recovery appliance from ransomware. I'll also find a few other white papers for you. So as I mentioned, if you do have any questions, feel free to ask them right now. If not, or if you find one later, give us a call, 02-8061-4444, or send us an email, sales@storagecraft.com.au. Once again, thank you. Questions, type them in the box.